Hey YouTube, welcome back to 1776 or Bust. Tonight I'm going to kind of go over what you might want to start looking for when you're about to purchase your first pistol. You know, from the beginner pistol owner to a more advanced owner, and what might work and might not work for you. First of all, I just want to say that each one of these guns has already been safety checked. I'm not going to go and do that again just for the sake of time. But prior to starting the recording, everything has been safety checked. The only one that had a full magazine was the XD, which you can see this is the magazine right here. And I'll safety check this one. There's nothing in there, as you can see. Now, in regards to what to be looking for as your first purchase for a pistol, it really is going to depend on the type of shooter you are or think you are. You know, when I personally looked for my first gun, I was looking for something that was safe. Safety for me was a big deal because I did not have a lot of experience owning a firearm. So for me, what I first looked for was a gun that, to me, had plenty of safety features that would make me, and anybody else for that matter, secure in carrying one. You know, my first pistol that I had initially looked at was actually an early Springfield XD, just because I like the features of the dingus on the trigger, and of course the safety, the grip safety. So I thought that was ultra safe for me to carry. However, after talking to a few people and talking a little bit more about gun ownership, some people said, look, if you want to start learning how to shoot a gun and you want to get good at it, one of the guns that you might want to start looking at is double action, single action. So I did a little bit of studying on it, I guess you could say, some reviews, some reading, and I decided that instead of going with an XD or Springfield XD originally, I actually went with a double single action pistol as my first gun that I've ever purchased. That gun is no longer with me, unfortunately. It was a gun that I had sold because I got a really good offer on it. Looking back at it now, I wish I would have kept it because it was such a great gun. That was actually a CZ P01. So for those of you who know that gun and have owned it or have shot it, you know just how darn good those guns are. Again, that's a pistol that got away that I should probably have never ever sold, but you know, so be it. That's the way it goes sometimes. As I got a little bit more proficient with gun ownership, a little bit more experience, trained a little bit more, I started feeling very comfortable with the idea of owning a striker-fired pistol. At that point, I was not a huge Glock fan, so I wasn't really looking for a Glock. I was looking for something as a Glock alternative that maybe had a little bit of a heavier trigger pull, or at least maybe a little bit safer trigger pull. You know, again, you can watch videos on YouTube of people shooting themselves in the leg with their Glocks. You know, unfortunately, sometimes you do things that you probably shouldn't do because you're trying to be either too careful or not careful enough. So I didn't really look at Glocks initially. Instead, what I did was I looked at a bunch of different pistols to try to figure out what I really wanted in regards to a carry option. So I actually went with this one right here, which is a P99. This gun right here I think would be a very good alternative to, let's say, a hammer-fired gun. It is a double action, single action gun. However, it is still a striker-fired pistol. So I think if you're looking for something that has those features of a double single action pistol, this would be a good one for you. Again, in my previous review, I talked about some of the features on it, so I won't go too much into detail with that. But you can see that it is a typical, and again, I'll withdraw the magazine, but the typical long double action pull on this pistol. So it is long and it is heavy. But the benefit of this pistol is your secondary shot is a very easy single action, which is very nice, very clean, very easy to shoot. For those people who might be a little concerned about carrying a gun that is, you know, fully cocked, like let's say a PPQ or a VP9, this has the option to actually decock the pistol to give you that extra safety of that double action pull. That's a very tough pull, so the only way this is going to go off is probably if you pull that trigger. So this is a good alternative as a first purchase. You know, if you ask me, this should have been the route that I went initially had I known about the pistol at the time, but I did not. But after going on the Walther website, I did see it and I actually started thinking about it, and this eventually became my everyday carry. So this was a great choice for me. This could be a great choice for you, especially if you're just starting out, just because of the trigger pull and the double action, single action mechanism. Now, as I got a little bit more into guns, I started thinking to myself, well, what are some of the guns out there that are considered really great guns that a lot of people get, that there's plenty of aftermarket support for, And that really, again, is a competitor to Glock, because again, I was not really into Glock at the time, so I decided that for me, Glock wasn't going to be it, and as a result, I went ahead and purchased my first Smith & Wesson M&P 9. Now, in my previous video, I did talk about this being my second one. The first one, of course, I got rid of because it just wasn't that good of a pistol. It did not fire very well, so I decided to get rid of it, and I actually picked this one up recently, and it is like night and day. But for me, again, you don't have that safety mechanism of the trigger right here. Instead, you have kind of that, it's almost like a cantilever, I guess you could say, but it's like a lever on the trigger. So this isn't exactly the most safe of safeties, but you know, again, if you become more confident and more proficient, you shouldn't have to worry about those secondary safeties. The first safety is you. You know, unless you put your finger on this trigger, that trigger will not go. So I think it's very beneficial for you to get trained and start training and start just practicing everything. Dry firing, holding, manipulating, whatever you need to do just to get yourself more proficient so that you can get yourself comfortable with something like this. This, to me, would be a great secondary pistol. Maybe not necessarily a starter, but definitely a secondary pistol. It's very affordable. The quality and craftsmanship is very good, especially on the newer versions of the M&Ps. And again, I would highly recommend this for someone who is looking to buy a pistol. Another one that I would be looking at. Again, I'll actually pull this one here. This great gun, the 320 in all FDE. I mean, this is probably one of the best guns that I own. It's not the best. I haven't actually done a review on the best gun that I own, but I will at some point. But this gun would be a great gun for a more experienced shooter. Why? Because you really have that light trigger. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, don't worry about the light trigger. As long as you don't put your finger on the trigger, nothing should happen. And they're accurate to say that. But at the same time, for a beginning gun owner, would I recommend something like this? Maybe not. Why? Because I think the trigger is a little bit too light for a beginner. Somebody who's just starting out, who hasn't had much time at the range or much time practicing at all, this might be something that you would consider later down the line, especially if you wanted to get into competing. And of course, if you become a lot more experienced with carrying, because you don't want somebody very jumpy and having a very, very light trigger, as you can see. So this might be something later down the line for a more experienced shooter when you become a little bit more proficient in owning a gun. But I would definitely recommend it at that point. And there's no doubt that this is a great pistol and highly recommend it. Now, let's say you want to carry and you want to carry concealed. What would you rather go with? Something like this or something like that? You have the PPS M2, you have the XD Mod 2, both great guns. One a little bit heavier than the other, one a little bit thicker than the other, but nonetheless, two really, really great guns. Again, if safety is a concern for you and you're a beginner, which one would I suggest? Well, it depends. They're both pretty safe guns as long as, as long as you don't put your finger on that trigger, the gun will not shoot. So I think from that aspect, both are a win. As a matter of fact, all these guns are wins, especially if you get trained and again, you know, you become more proficient at your shooting. But at this point, if you were going to ask me which one of these would you choose as a starter gun, again, if you're not very proficient, if you're a little uneasy like I was when I first bought my first pistol, I would go with the XD Mod 2. Why? Many more safety mechanisms. Again, you have the idea of the dingus on the trigger here. You've got your grip safety on the back. So again, the only way this will activate is if that's pushed down completely. The trigger pull is about a 6-pound trigger pull, so it's not very light. So this would be probably my recommendation before, let's say, the PPS M2. The M2, again, is empty, but let's rack that slide. You have the dingus on the trigger, and that's about it. So the only way that trigger is going to go is if you put your finger right on it and you put some pressure and it goes off. Other than that, there are no other safeties to this except for the internal safeties, which all of these guns do have. But at the same time, you know, if you were a starter in regards to gun ownership, probably recommend this one here first, and then as you get more comfortable, maybe go with something like this. Over time, I think if you become a little bit more proficient and you start to work at it and you start to practice a lot and you get some time at the range, I think overall you will have a lot more confidence in owning a firearm. I think a lot of it is confidence, because if you don't have confidence to handle a firearm in a safe and manageable way, then I think you really should not start off with something like, let's say, a 320, maybe even go with something like the P99, maybe the Springfield models, even in the full size, or even a Glock for that matter with the bladed trigger. So it really is up to you ultimately. Hopefully you guys have some input and want to give some advice on what your first pistol purchases were. If so, just leave some comments, let me know what you think, and of course subscribe. And again, freedom is never free.